it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Let the rain kiss you. Let the rain beat upon your head with silver liquid drops. Let the rain sing you a lullaby. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know about the pandemic. It's pretty horrifying and still early days, with ample time to get much worse. Forget all that. I stumbled upon something much more sinister. There's a cult using the illness and community angst as a smokescreen. Read on and I'll tell you what I saw. Now, if I was in your shoes, I'd be wondering a few things. Who is this guy? Is there any proof? And why tell me and not the authorities? Firstly, I'm a nobody. I have no background in cults, no fancy university degrees, no stints in the army or emergency services. Just a regular Joe Schmo. Obviously, I'm not handing out my name or any details that might lead back to me. Posting this account is dangerous enough, and I really want to live. That leaves a question of proof, and I'm afraid I have jack shit of that too. Just a picture taken on my phone, itself several generations old with craptastic zooming functions. It could probably be debunked with the right gear and determination, so you'll just have to decide for yourself if I'm right or wrong. As for the authorities, there's not a lot of trust in them under this government. I've given them the same chance as you, but I doubt they'll listen to reason. These are the guys who deny climate change, abuse their office for partisan games, and practice their own version of fake news. Yeah, they'll act when the shit hits the fan and claim ignorance after the fact. The way I see it, if my account goes viral or gets noticed by the right people, maybe the fan won't get too shitty. Well, time to get into it. Down here in Oz, we've been running short of goods in our supermarkets, chemists, and other related shops. Toilet paper, aka dunny rolls, were the first thing to fly off the shelves, and you've probably seen or heard a few memes about it. Yeah, some are pretty funny, I'll give you that. Hand sanitizer was also quickly snatched up, and that also figures into my account. Canned goods, pasta, noodles, they're starting to go, but it's not really relevant here. Well, the thing about dunny rolls is that they take up a lot of space, so the shops don't keep a whole lot of them in reserve. It takes time to ship things from warehouses to supermarket shelves, and most of us are pretty dispersed these days, well, except for the city people. Lots of little supermarkets are tucked into the suburbs, so that's a ton of stores to share stock with. Beyond that, who knows how well the supply system is. When the Prime Minister says it's all fine, I'm not exactly filled with confidence. Yeah, this is the man who holidayed overseas while bushfires raged back at home. I'll give more credence to the experts. It was in a supermarket that I first got tangled up in this cult bullshit. Since they have surveillance, I'm not going to tell you which supermarket or where it was. Yeah, like I said earlier, I want to live, and that means staying anonymous. I was accompanying an old relative, well, my dad, basically doing the driving and the carrying. And yes, we were after some dunny rolls, along with 12 other items. It was flying off the shelves fast, and I noticed a group of people swooping in with empty trolleys. Yep, they had nothing else save a single bottle of hand sanitizer. The one good per person restriction had just come into effect. So seeing my chance, I scooped up the last pack of dunny rolls and beat a hasty retreat out of that aisle. My dad chuckled at our fortune and called me a good boy. Well, I must admit I did like the praise, because I don't get much of it from the old man. The group of hand sanitizer shoppers gave me the evil eye, and one of them even shadowed us for the rest of our shopping trip. He was a middle-aged man, nothing special to look at, and dressed in some pretty sad attire. If it came down to a fight, I'd favor my chances over him. Still, I didn't dare leave my trolley unattended for a second. There was something off about him, and his unassuming friends too. I was glad to pay for our goods and leave. Well, skipping ahead, Dad and myself returned home to his retirement village. Usually there were organised buses to take the residents out to the shops, but with things as they are, I felt I had the need to help out before things got worse. We had a beer and just talked about the hell this country was heading into. Dad said he'd never seen anything like this, save for the real bad natural disasters of the past. I told him not to worry, but to be careful. Older people seemed more vulnerable to the pandemic, and I wasn't sure how much longer I'd be able to visit him. Lockdowns were being considered. I'd just have to call him on the phone if it came down to that. Well, a little while later, his phone actually did ring. I didn't catch who was on the other end of the line, but my dad was annoyed. When I asked him about it, he said that someone wanted to buy the toilet paper off him for double its price. I got worried. How the hell did anyone know he'd just got some? None of the other residents were outside, mostly because it was safer to be indoors. Before I left, I made my dad promise to lock the door and refuse contact with any more weirdos. A few days later, I got the news that nobody wants to hear. Dad was gone. This man had shaped my life, and I'd never really gotten the chance to thank him for it, not properly. I just sat through the phone call, too wrapped up in my grief and the mountain of things I'd have to do. But I dragged myself back out to the retirement village before he could be taken away. Oh, even if Dad wasn't truly with us, I wanted to see him in the flesh. Plus I knew the old bastard would want me watching over his things. The village staff were pretty good to me. Death was something they trained for. I filled out a form or two, made sure the old man kept his dignity, and called the relatives with the bad news. I also checked Dad's unit to remove any perishable food, clean up the place, and prepare for the removal of his personal effects. I'd need to come back with boxes for that, when I could muster the will. Oh, and the dunny rolls were gone. All of them. A sinking feeling hit me. When I asked around, one of my dad's neighbors said that they'd seen a man leave the unit with the toilet paper hours before I got the call. Sure as shit, the description fit that of the creepy supermarket shopper. Well, they said my dad died of natural causes. I really wanted some more tests done, but the rest of Dad's family didn't go for it. I could have kicked up a stink, but even I wasn't sure if I was thinking straight. Instead, I decided to return to the supermarket and find those creepy shoppers. It was a way to dodge things and cope with Dad's passing. Would getting back some dunny rolls really make a difference? Well, probably not. It was purely by chance that I saw the same group. I practiced a macho-sounding speech and considered recording it all on my phone. But when I saw them again, my courage just seemed to slip away. This time they had paper towels and disinfectant in their trolleys. I decided that it was too public for a confrontation and waited outside to tell them. The group had a minivan, which aren't all that common around here, and so following them was easy. Took down their rego plate, but well, with our current privacy laws, it wouldn't do me any good, unless I went to the cops. If I caught these guys up to no good, maybe then I could use it. I drove past the van as it pulled into a long driveway and found a place to park my own car out of sight. The property was sizable but pretty run down. If these guys turned out to be drug dealers, I wouldn't have been surprised. Of course, if they were dealers, it'd be even more dangerous to confront them. Well, I'd try to be careful. With all the junk and foliage, keeping out of sight looked doable. I crept closer to the house, avoiding windows and listening in to see how many people were there. The TV was pretty loud and I snuck a peek into the living room. Nobody was there. More creeping around followed, and I hoped to hell they didn't have a dog out here. Eventually I tracked the group to a shed. It was a bit rusted, but more or less intact. It also had a padlock on the door, but it wasn't currently locked. Well, I couldn't see the group yet, but I heard noises and voices. Something like a chant. It was foreign, maybe Arabic, not that I know. I didn't even watch SBS. The urge to leave was damn enticing. In the end, I decided to hide in the yard and sneak a peek at that shed after the freaky people went back to the house. There was a really odd smell coming from a pile of compost, and I swear it had huge worms in it. Well, I'm no animal expert, but do green worms of that size even exist? Nearby bins were overflowing with empty dunny rolls. It took almost an hour of waiting, but I got my chance to see what they were hiding. And Jesus, it was something to see. Stacked within the shed were mummified bodies, at least 50 plus. The bottom ones were wrapped with some sort of linen and smelled oily. But closer to the top of the stack, the bodies were wrapped in torn bedsheets and smelled of sanitizer. There was a ton of discarded toilet rolls in a barrel, again with that oily smell. So presumably, they'd been using those too. Well, I highly doubt it was used to wipe you-know-what, anyway. I took a quick picture on my phone of the mummies, since the video would drain my battery like nobody's business, and come out pretty shit. I also had to hide behind the pile of mummies to avoid detection. One of the creepy people dropped off more supplies to the shed. I swear that some of the mummified bodies twitched in response to my proximity. God, were they alive? Or was there something in them? After the cultist had gone, I booked it out of there, before someone decided to lock the shed. Well, screw getting my dad's dunny rolls back. Storing corpses without a license was surely something I could go to the cops with, but I opted to send them a letter instead. It contained a printed page of my findings and a copy of the mummy photo. Well, I didn't go back to the place and tried to get on with life. Dad had a funeral, thankfully a cremation, and then began the fun process of inheritance and sharing out his things. Well, I did keep half an eye on the news, and I saw nothing about the cult. I looked up some mummification information on the web, but what I saw doesn't completely gel with it. And those green worms, well, I didn't find anything that matched them either. Clearly the cult was up to something different. Well, I could make shit up, link it to the pandemic maybe, but that'd be just me pulling your chain. God, I strongly considered returning there with a can of petrol to burn the contents of that shed into ash. But of course, I chickened out. It'd just be me versus half a dozen crazies. And what if I made things worse? No. Best course of action is to spread the word. Well, maybe you're disappointed in me. If so, that's a fair cop. But if someone strange offers to buy you your dunny rolls, well, I'd take the deal, just to be safe. If the rain spoils our picnic, but saves a farmer's crop, who are we to say it shouldn't rain?
Hey, how have you been? It's been a long time, hasn't it? I miss you so much, and honestly, you're the only thing on my mind these days. I hope you're doing well over there. I used to be really mad that I never got a response from you. Writing these letters is what keeps me sane after you left. I was devastated. Well, still am. Still can't stop thinking about you and when I'd see you again. Well, here's another letter from me. And I know it's a bit late this time round, but the last couple of days have been strange. Oh, how I wish you'd been here to comfort me, to tell me that I'm okay, but, well, you aren't. A little self-pity and a bottle of whatever I can afford to buy with the money I save is the only kind of consolation I get now. Whatever happened last week, I don't think I really understand, but maybe I don't want to. I'm in great pain, physically as well as mentally. I'm in anguish. I don't know why what happened did happen, but it did. There's no denying it. There are monsters in this world, true and real monsters. Scarier than those things that come at us in our nightmares. Maybe this world is a waking nightmare. If you think about it, it is. Every waking second. Oh. Do you remember all those deep, half-asleep conversations we had? Now, you told me I was going to drive myself crazy with all that overthinking. I miss that now. I'm sorry. I'm a little drunk right now. Just a little. Shouldn't matter much. Anyway, that last letter I wrote you. Did you get a chance to read it yet? Not really sure if you did, but then again, I don't know if you read anything I send you. The mailbox must be full of letters. Poor little Blaire's tiny, plain, white letter must get lost in there somewhere. Sorry, I'm going off again. It's just, I've been a mess lately. Big mess. Life has been bland, and in the last letter I sent you, I told you how I was going to do it, didn't I? How I was going to end it all. The pain of existence I carry with me everywhere. I know. I said it 1,000,000 times already, but yes, it did have to do with you. And no, I don't blame you for my pain. That's just me. Guess I'm more fragile than I think I am. Getting that confession off my chest isn't even embarrassing now. Like I said, I feel nothing these days. Everything is bland. I was up really early that day. I remember it being 4 a.m. because I couldn't believe it myself. It was too perfect. I hadn't set an alarm, but I did check my phone the first thing in the morning. The night before, I didn't really care when I woke up. Just went to sleep and decided to go on with it whenever I was up. That 4 a.m. was so perfect. It was like a sign. Perfect day to do it. The time on my phone wanted to do it. The bed wanted me to do it. If there's a God, I'm sure he wanted me to do it as well. Even I wanted it. There was nothing that would stop me now. It was a strange feeling. Yes, it was. The universe agreeing with you when you wanted to kill yourself wasn't exactly something to be excited about. This is a very hateful world. Everything in this world wants you gone. Nothing loves you. Nothing cares about you. Nothing truly feels. That I know was sure, because I sure didn't feel as much as a little speck of anything. Well, this is how I planned to do it. I didn't tell it to you in the last letter, but here it is, my master plan. I was going to walk for a while. A long walk to the park. You know which one. There, on that special bench where I'd sat alone for hours on the day you left. I'd sit and let myself bleed to death. It's called exsanguination. I looked it up. There's a new word for you. Well, I planned to slit my wrist at first, but that'd be really slow, and I couldn't risk anyone finding me. Couldn't stand life anymore. You have to understand. It wasn't that there was something really wrong with me, it was just, well, everyone else in the world had something wrong with them. And as it turned out later that day, it was true. Well, I put on a scarf and a coat. I know what I was going to do, but I wanted to at least die comfortably. I wanted to carry out a blanket with me for extra comfort, but that would just look silly. So I locked the door behind me, touching it one last time, trying to feel that feeling of touching that damn door one last time. I didn't know what I would miss once I died. It didn't feel the same this time. In fact, it felt warm. Strangely warm. Don't know why, but I wanted to pull the door out and give it an embrace. Oh, I would miss you, door. Walked down the steps and out onto the streets. Glorious. Took a while to reach the park, but I did, and took my queen's chair to rule over the world of park benches with my initials carved on them. Sitting down, I got the tiny box cutter I'd got for myself the day before, raised it up to my neck, ready to bleed to death. A sweet relief for me. Life hadn't been kind to me. Why should I? In that moment, everything about you flashed in my eyes. Everything you did, no matter how much we'd fought over it, no matter how much I hated you for it. I know you had me somewhere in your heart while you did, and maybe all these letters I've been writing to you all this while, well, I'm asking you for your forgiveness. I know it's too late to apologize to you, but please, I never had it in me to ask for it before. I did hate you, yes. And I did wish you dead, but all that didn't last, as you can tell. People may call you a terrible human being. People may hate you for what you did, but I don't. In that instance of realization, I felt a strangeness in the air. I knew this instant that I wasn't alone. Maybe it's just near certain death that we begin to really notice things, but in that moment, I could see with my eyes closed. He came out of nowhere, rushing to me and asking if I was okay. For some reason, I can't remember his face. I do remember his clean-shaven face, green eyes, and slightly large build, but, well, he was tall and a little overweight, and there was something about him. In that instant, everything froze for a moment. I heard him speak, but I didn't listen. I saw his lips move as he tried desperately to get me to drop the blades. He then said something and looked at me. I raised my head silently, answering yes to whatever he'd asked, and the response put a thin smile on his face. He awkwardly put his hand on my shoulder and escorted me back to his car. Now, maybe it was just my state of mind at the time, but I really don't know why I went along with him. I actually didn't want to, but I didn't refuse either. I just blankly accepted whatever he said, with either a yes or a thank you, and he seemed to be satisfied with that. I don't remember much about him, like I said, but I do remember that satisfied grin he had every time he heard me speak. Well, the house was a mess, and from the moment I entered it, I smelled it. That sweet, familiar smell. That smell I loved as much as I hated. Alcohol. And I knew from the instant I was there was lots of it. He sat me down on a plain chair and offered me a cup of stale coffee and that same grin to go with it. For some reason, I didn't mind. I took it. Don't remember much after that, except crying. Lots and lots of crying. And there were those sounds of singing. Singing in the rain. I remember it so vividly. I can't write this. I just can't. Those are the things I do not want in my mind, and it feels like, well, it feels so strange, like they're there and aren't there at the same time. I don't remember most of it because, well, my mind hides it from me, but I'm not an idiot. The great overthinker I am, I know exactly what happened. And even though you know it hurts writing this, you need to know. You must know everything. I don't think I was there in the dark basement for too long. My mind was blank most of the time. I do remember being given injections from time to time, too weak to fight back, and then being left alone again. I wished, truly, at that moment, to die, to go away. I should have gone on with it faster. Whatever these people were going to do to me, or perhaps had already done, death would definitely be kinder to me. Then, there was that night. That night I remember everything. I remember seeing the man come into the basement and take his belt off. All sense of time has gone around this time, but I could tell that this was late night, judging by the man's look. He'd been out drinking, definitely had friends over. He did call out to them from time to time. They called out to him too. I do remember what was said, but I don't want to go over them. My skin becomes a tight prison once I think about it. My only urge is to cut free. Yes, I did cut myself. Several times, in fact. It's the only way I can breathe. At least, now that is. I don't know, but this body is a strange design. We're all like tiny vessels of red ink. The way this ink pours can tell so many different stories. So much about the person. Oh, I'm going off again. I think maybe my drunk mind is trying to avoid remembering the incident as much as me, but if I want you to know the truth, I need to endure it. Maybe a little longer. I'll try my best. I wasn't crying that night. There was something off about tonight. I felt nothing. I could feel, but I couldn't. I don't know if that makes sense, does it? Well, the man was done and proceeded to put on his belt again when he smiled at me and then froze. He saw something. I didn't know what it was at the time, but he looked behind me, terrified. I didn't care what he saw, but that look gave me more satisfaction than anything in a long time. To see him, a man whom at that moment I saw as the most evil thing this universe had produced, apparently seeing something far worse than him. Should I have been afraid? Probably, but not at this time. What could something that evil do to me that wasn't done already? I was just preparing for death anyway, wasn't I? And then it revealed itself. And the last thing I remember before passing out was the look of complete and utter fear in the man's face as the thing walked closer to me. 8 feet tall, brown and mutilated flesh. I think hell opened its gates and let something out. Something that genuinely cared. Something that wanted me safe. Maybe some of the things we fear are actually there to protect us, to keep us safe, to put itself in harm's way, just so we can be safe. Whatever this thing was, it did something bad to the man, and I wasn't given the details. The psychiatrist had considered me too vulnerable to know at that point. I'm sure she'd be proud once she knows how much I'm drinking right now. Obviously, she wouldn't care. I'm just another job, nothing more. Oh, and, well, I found your ring. It's funny how at the police station I finally found the thing. I know it might sound strange, but it was on my finger all along. I'm not sure about that anymore. I'm not sure about anything. The world we live in is strange, and we make it stranger. That sweet surprise I got when I felt my face scratch while rubbing my palm against my tearing face. Don't know why he didn't take it, or maybe it was given to me. Like I said, I just don't know. Whatever that thing was, I've been feeling safe ever since, especially after hearing about the gruesome details. I know how much you hate violence, so I won't say much, but it was very, very bad. There were organs and blood everywhere. Like a blender had gone off there and... Sorry. I don't know why I wanted you to know this, but I feel like you needed to know. Made me feel satisfied. Maybe waiting for God's miracle all along. Something else finally took sympathy on me and gave me what I needed. Whoever it is out there, be sure to thank them for me. I'll be leaving this ring with a letter. It belongs to me much more than you. And I know how strange this all seems. I can't accept it either. But then, I guess that's how it is. And as long as I live, and yes, I did choose life, I'll have to learn to accept it. Goodbye. I'll not be writing to you again, I guess. Maybe it is time to move on. I'll give it a try. Maybe I will last longer this time. Goodbye, and with much love. Rest in peace, Mom. Blaire.
The best thing one can do when it's raining is to let it rain. I recently had an odd experience. When I told my friends, most of them thought I was straight up crazy. This happened late this summer. I'd woken up at about 5:50 a.m. on a Saturday. I knew I couldn't get back to sleep. There was just too much crap on my mind. It had been a really long week at work with a lot of stress, and I'd had some, well, shall we say, friction with my girl. So I went out for a drive to clear my head. Can't speak to those of you outside the Rockies, but if you live near the mountains, let me tell you, there's nothing quite like blasting some tunes and driving the mountains in good weather. And so, after minimal consideration, I threw on some metal and set off for a drive. was actually really what I needed. A great start for the day. I'd gotten most of the way to Estes Park before I turned around and headed back home. Oh, the mountains were beautiful. The air was clean and crisp, especially for a July day. With the beautiful scenery, the music and RPMs really got the stress worked out. Sometimes just getting out and letting the miles peel by is exactly the kind of catharsis that you need. The drive got me pretty centered, and when I was back in the suburbs, I'd switched to some less intense music. It was Nightwish, I'm pretty sure. I was just kind of cruising along, not really headed back to the house in any specific way yet, just rather winding down after the drive. When I got back to the general area I lived in, and gotten off the main thoroughfares, I noticed there was a set of signs leading to a yard sale. Decided to go check it out on a whim. I honestly don't remember quite which neighborhood I wound up in when I stopped for the yard sale. I swear to God I wish I did. If I did, I could go back and ask some questions, but it's funny how memory works, though. Well, funny in that Soviet Union, not everyone gets dark humor, just like food kind of way. Anyway, I stopped on the opposite side of the street from the yard sale, too close to a fire hydrant. That much I remember, for whatever it's worth. I got out of the car and strolled casually across the street. The yard sale itself was vaguely disappointing. Mostly porcelain chokes, clothes that went out of fashion in the 80s, and bad replicas of boring paintings. However, I was looking for something to buy. I wanted to scratch a whim, if you know what I mean. After a couple of laps around the sale, I noticed something that had passed my attention previously. It was a rag doll. Long black strands of yarn for hair. One red button and one black button for eyes, and a kind of Wednesday Addams dress. It also had one of those name tag stickers with Yvette scrawled across it in broken crayon print. It was super creepy. I couldn't imagine that it was supposed to be anything else. That being said, it certainly had personality, and was on the cheap. So, lacking interest in any other options of things to buy, and kind of taken by the nobody loves me charm of the doll, I threw down the $3 they were asking for and carted my loot back to the car. On the drive back, I remember thinking, well, now that I bought it, what should I do with it? With no real answer in mind. Sadly, throw it in a dumpster fire didn't come to mind. Regardless, I got home, carted it inside, and kind of tossed it aside on the little circular table in the dining room niche off the side of the kitchen. It slid to a rest near the edge of the table, and probably would have remained there for some unspecified number of weeks before I decided to do something with it. Well, when I say probably, I mean certainly, but that's besides the point. However, it wasn't left up to my bad housekeeping habits to dictate, which is why I am here. Anyway, after discarding the doll on the table, I moved on to a more important matter, specifically lunch. I have no idea what I had for lunch specifically. Probably a sandwich and quite likely chips. Well, very likely chips. I have a particular weakness for barbecue flavor Lays. After I'd wrapped up lunch, I was washing the plate in the kitchen sink along with a few other things that had been sitting there. Washing dishes is kind of a mechanical task for me, and I was staring blankly out of the window in the kitchen. Not really looking at anything in particular, just zoning. My phone was in the living room, playing tunes from my playlist, loud enough to hear, but not quite loud enough to drown out the monotone hum of the AC. I probably wouldn't remember that any more than I remember lunch, but there was an oddity that occurred that made it stand out in my memory. Really, the entirety of the rest of the afternoon was strange enough. It's pretty cemented in my memory. But this was where it really started to stand out for me. I saw a SWAT van pass by, followed by what appeared to be a Benz S-Class, followed by a second SWAT van. I remember I stopped, hand submerged up to my wrist in a glass, my dead-eye gaze replaced with one of notable curiosity. I craned my neck to see if I could figure out where they were going through the dense trees. I don't know if there's anywhere where that would be a normal sight, but it was absolutely bizarre in my area. I live in a relatively secluded neighborhood that has plenty of land and plenty of trees. It's a good place to live. I couldn't imagine what would have needed not only one, but 2 SWAT vans. I mean, there's houses worth plenty more than mine further down the road, and money can equal trouble, but I don't think anyone has quite that much money in this neighborhood. Alternatively, they could have just been passing through, but it's enough of a detour to get anywhere useful. I couldn't imagine why they'd do it. Anyway, after pondering that for a couple of minutes, I put my hand out of the cup and went back to actually trying to clean it. The next big event of the day happened only a few minutes later. I'd finished washing the dishes and had moved on to rinsing them and stacking them in the rack to dry. I was about half done with that process when I heard a loud thudding at the front door, immediately accompanied by a commanding voice shouting, "Police, open up." I'll be honest, my first reaction was, what the hell? I mean, I'd seen SWAT drive by, so I should have consciously been aware of what was happening, but it seemed so outlandish to me to have the police at my door that it just didn't click. Honestly, it took me a moment to get my brain into working order enough to even realize I should probably respond. I was 3/4 of the way to the door when they started pounding and yelling again. I was half afraid to open the door, but I figured that they sounded sort of a little bit agitated, and leaving them to sit on the front stoop was unlikely to improve their attitudes, so I decided the best thing to do was to open the door. The rest of my day was, well, shall we say, a right proper cluster. However, if those SWAT officers were wearing body cameras, I really want the footage of when I opened the door. Not saying this was a pleasant experience by any means, and I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I bet my expression was worth $1 million. The police were in full blacked-out armor, shotguns and M16s, and standing in the middle of them was a fellow who was apparently a priest, in long flowing robes, a tall funny hat, and I swear, what appeared to be white body armor with red and gold trim. He was flanked on both sides by fellows who I assume were lesser members of the clergy, as their robes were less flowy, their bulletproof vests less ornate, and they were holding these incense censers. No joke. So, honestly speaking, I couldn't have given you a half a reason why SWAT would have been at my door, much less SWAT plus the bizarre combat cleric and his minions. I'm sure my face was the very picture of confusion. Anyway, I very rapidly found myself face down on the ground, with a bunch of heavily armored men in my front hall and a boisterous cleric liberally spritzing everything with what I can only assume was holy water, and loudly demanding I tell him where the hell form was. The entire time, the 2 minion priests were swinging the incense things and chanting in Latin, or at least I assume it was Latin. I didn't understand it, but really had other things on my mind and wasn't paying so much attention to them as to identify the language they were speaking. While I'd like to say I remained calm and tried to rationally tell them I had no idea what they were talking about, that would be a lie. I was mostly incomprehensible. I was stuttering so badly and tripping over my words so much. I suppose that will happen to you when you've got that many guys with that many big barrel guns who are that upset that you're not complying with their demands. The long and the short of it was, they were wanting information I didn't understand, and they didn't understand me in return because I wasn't particularly coherent. Good times to be had all around. If the problem hadn't more or less resolved itself, I'm not sure how everything would have turned out in the end. That aside, after what was probably a couple of minutes of their interrogation, one of them, a fellow carrying a shotgun, for whatever that's worth, shouted out, "Target located! Target located!" Considering he was just standing a few feet away from us, in the kitchen, I'm not sure why he felt the need to yell, but he wasn't asking for my opinion anyhow. The bulk of them then rushed into the dining room portion of the kitchen, leveled their weapons at the table, and
started screaming things like, "Don't resist," or "On the ground." Couldn't see clearly what was going on from my vantage point on the ground, but it seemed as though the table had offended them greatly. Or at least, that's how it appeared to my adrenaline and fear-addled brain. I'm pretty sure that I yelled at them, telling them to leave my table alone, probably yelling at them to leave my table alone with some particularly colourful and spicy metaphors mixed in. Regardless, they ignored me. The battle bishop and his incense-spewing bodyguards advanced as well. When he started in with what I can only assume was a Latin mistration of some sort, and started aggressively splashing my dining room table with holy water, what might be the strangest thing of the entire day occurred. The room got cold. I mean, like, I could see my breath. Also, it got dark. Not nighttime dark, but more like overcast, it might rain, kind of day dark. Also, a distinct smell, like rot, started up. One of my friends had me smell rotting eggs, which apparently he let go bad for this express purpose. When I identified them as the same smell, he let me know it was brimstone or sulfur. So yeah, I'm sure all of this is terribly cliche, but what can I say? That's how it played out. Anyway, that all happened and, well, I'd thought the SWAT dudes were agitated before. They kicked it up several levels. There was a lot of screaming and swearing. Honestly, though, that didn't seem to help much. The temperature kept decreasing, kept getting darker, and the smell got stronger. It started mixing with the smell of burnt ozone. Then the priest kicked it up a notch too. He started belting out his mantra at a volume and intensity that would have made a South American soccer announcer proud. These two minions were responding back to his mandates with very nearly the same intensity. Then he pulled out what appeared to be a glass vial of holy water, smashed it on the table and dropped to his knees, thundering out such rapid-fire strings of Latin, I'd say he'd have had to have been fluent. His litany built into a frankly impressive crescendo, and then finished. Everything went quiet for about 30 seconds. Then the police again started screaming for the table to drop to the floor. Then, well, in a movie I might think this would have been obvious, but honestly I wasn't meta-analyzing anything at that exact moment in life. So yeah, the doll fell off the table. Basically, as soon as it started falling, it got warmer and brighter in the room, and the room went back to smelling heavily of incense instead of rot and ozone. Then one of the SWAT guys grabs the doll, stuffs it in a burlap sack that has crosses and Bible verses spray painted on it, and the lot of them double time it out of my house and speed off into the afternoon. I laid on the floor for a while, not finding that I had the energy to try and get back up. After a while, I gathered enough gumption to migrate to the living room. I sat down on the couch, contemplating the merits of getting blackout drunk, in the hopes that I'd forget the events of the day, and there was again a knocking at my door. I shuffled over to the door like some shell-shocked zombie and opened it to find a man with a really nice suit, really nice watch, perfect haircut, and a G-Series license plate on his car, was standing at my door. It was at that point where I did either the most sensible thing I did that day, or least sensible thing, and I slammed the door in his face. He stood there and knocked for a while longer, and I ostensibly ignored him while pouring myself a drink or three. So, anyway, that's my story. If anyone out there has any ideas about what happened or what a hell form is, or whether there is anything I can do about the fact I'm now noticing I'm being tailed by blacked-out vehicles with G-Series plates, well, I'm all ears.
Clouds come floating into my life, no longer to carry rain or usher storm, but to add colour to my sunset sky.
Greetings, friends. I want to tell you some personal thoughts on the world and on the very nature of existence itself. Why, you might ask? Well, when you're an immortal being who's seen empires come and go, when you've taken the souls of both kings and peasants, both wicked and good, you frankly get tired of the same questions being asked over and over again. Now, I will not degrade your intelligence by repeating those questions, but I feel I may as well show you just a little bit of what's behind the veil. To start off with, no, I do not know who or what created me. As far as I know, I just came to be. I have no memory of a birth or a glorious light. I just came to with a knowledge of my purpose. Oh yes, my purpose. Well, my little ones, it is not as simple as it may seem. I'm not just simply the vehicle upon which souls are taken. No, I'm also the caretaker of those souls. I do not judge, for that's another's job, nor do I care for the souls and try to give them some sense of fulfillment. I cannot say I'm emotional, but I do have an understanding of your nature, and it is that nature to which I truly wish to speak today. As much as I would love to share some stories about my experience, I feel that's for another time. For now, my focus must be on your own nature and the essence of what you are. Your great philosophers and thinkers have long debated the very reason for your purpose here. Is there some bigger meaning to it all? Or are you just meant to live and die, to be forgotten like dust notes in a windstorm? Well, it's both yes and no. I know that sounds overly simplistic, but please let me explain. You exist on a planet that has seen the souls of billions, that is awash with blood and whose very foundations are built on a mound of bones. Every action you decide to take has been copied, or will be. Every turn in the path that you see as new and glorious is in fact another beat-down patch of brush that has been trodden before. So, how can one mortal hope to be significant? How can one of you hope to be different from all the other ants in the mound? To be honest, you cannot. You are worthless when looking at the herd. Your great accomplishments are but momentary glimpses of light in the darkness. If you wish to find some semblance of meaning in this uncaring universe, you must not hope to ever achieve anything in the annals of history. No, you must descend into yourself, into the madness that lurks there. Yes, you heard me correctly, to the madness inside of you. Why? Because in each person's madness there is a freedom, a uniqueness born out of pain and insanity. To take your most forbidden desires and set them free is where your true value lies. I once took the soul of Nero, the Roman emperor, and I must say that his madness and embracing of it was one of the most refreshing things I'd seen in centuries. He understood the truth I wish to impart to you, my guests. To be free from the inevitable forgetfulness of history, you must be willing to embrace the madness. But what about evil, you say? What about morality and the goodness that is so wrapped up in our human condition? Well, it's all an illusion. A fairy tale told by trembling men to comfort themselves on long winter's nights while they huddled around their fires. To assume that pity, charity, and empathy are natural parts of you is to spit in the face of the universe. Do the few acts of benevolent rulers throughout history cover up the acts of evil? No. I dare say they are but specks of starlight in a dark universe. They're not to be counted as anything more than selfish acts done to make themselves look good. Whenever you humans have been given the chance between an act of good or evil, your first reaction is always to go with evil. What about the tender mercies of a mother with her children? Or the very innocence of children themselves? More hollow and false images. Your mothers choose to be loving towards you out of a selfish desire to appease themselves and prove they are good. They can no more control their selfish whims as I can control when it might rain. Children are not immune from wickedness either. Have you seen the evils children are capable of? Have you seen how quickly they embrace cruelty towards others and themselves? You may try to argue that it's a learned behavior developed by a decadent and fallen society, but you would be wrong. How can a child be programmed at the ages of 2 or 3 to perform acts of violence? I'd say that denying the true nature of yourselves is actually crueler than that of the child. How might that be, you ask? Well, to explain, I'll first have to give you a very simple thought experiment. You have 2 choices. You can either be the hostage on their knees with the gun to their head, or you can be the person holding the gun. If you answered you'd rather be the hostage, you're deluding yourself and hiding it from no one. Truly, your nature is to be cruel, and that is not wrong. In fact, I would say that it is the most pure form of life you can live. To explain further, why would you be ashamed of your cruelty? Your history is proof that it's the most evil and cruel who always rise to the top. Your greatest leaders, those you hold up and emulate, were some of the cruelest people to have ever existed. Julius Caesar is one example. Today he's thought of as this great military and political leader, a populist and a man who embraced all of the noble virtues you aspire to. But he was also a mass murderer who killed untold numbers of men, women, and children. A man who had no thoughts about anything other than his own ambition. Yet today he's held up as the paragon of virtue. How can that be? How does your very nature not scream cruelty when it exalts the very blood-soaked figure of it? His throne was not made of gold. It was made out of the dead he'd slaughtered. In a broader perspective, I conclude that that is true of all your venerated heroes. All are covered in blood and have walked their paths to fame over the still warm bodies of dead women and children. Oh, but that was in the past. We are more sophisticated now, would be your response. But you are not. Look at the world as it sits now. Has the evil ever changed? Oh, sure, you try to do your best to polish it up and, of course, to appear noble, but it changes nothing. You still enjoy blood and violence. You still wish to be there when they cut off the head of the criminal. You refuse to acknowledge the true evil around you while still playing into the macabre. Do you really think your lust for death is any less than before? Do you think that just because you put it on a screen or go to a sporting event that the need for blood is somehow lessened? You've not changed. It's only the means by which you consume it that has. And even then, look at the chaos around you. Every day people are killed in barbaric ways. Every day people go missing, snatched up by sadists and worse. You pretend as if this is somehow the fault of just the people committing those acts. You may say you feel for them, but in your heart you're secretly glad it was not you that it happened to. You may go out and help search, or act all pithy in front of your friends and family, but in your heart you're glad you get to go home safe that night. Don't try to deny it. I know the hearts of mortals, and they are more evil than many of the denizens I deal with regularly. For at least the deities know what they are. They don't fight against their very core existence. Don't let this... come on. Do not let this sadden you, though. No. Celebrate it. Go out and engage in your barbarity. Feel the joy of plunging a knife into the ones you purport to love. Let their screams fill you with ecstasy, and their tears to fill the hole in your hollow hearts. Do not be dismayed by the laws of your kind, for those laws were also written by humans who engage in cruelty. So, go out and fulfill those most deliciously macabre desires. Free the monsters that you hide under a cloak of civility. Your nature is to butcher, to rape, and to torture. Tie someone up and slowly sever each limb while they are alive, and tell me it doesn't give you a sense of power. Skin them alive and eat their flesh right in front of them, and tell me you don't feel superior. Take what you want because you want it. There doesn't have to be a logical reason. Nay, your very soul screams out to be anathema of logic and reason. It wants to act on its lusts. So, why not allow that? Why play the game of morality? Why burden yourself down with all these thoughts of culture and society? Tear them all down brick by brick and rebuild them on pillars of bone and chains of hate. Consume the fire in your hearts and unleash the inferno on this planet. To exist in this way is to embrace freedom. It is to embrace the very essence of the universe. Nothing ever happens without blood being the price. Everything great is built upon a foundation of the damned. The pitiful and worthless screams of those who are too weak to seize the moment will be your soothing music. You mustn't be afraid of your demons, because they're not here to hurt you. Oh, no. On the contrary, they're here to help you, to be your guide to throwing off the shackles of your mortal existence. How can your very soul be wrong? If it's screaming for cruelty and for the feeling of blood sating your thirst, then how can it be wrong? It was here before you were. It'll be here long after you're gone. To try and twist it into something it is not will leave you in a state of perpetual confusion. My dear friends, you must embrace what you are, not what you pretend to be. Throw off the cloak of morality and jump into the abyss of insanity. I say this not wanting you to be hurt, but to let yourselves be truly happy. Until next time, my dear mortal. The drops of rain make a hole in the stone, not by violence, but by oft falling. The first rays of sunlight crept over the mountains, casting its warmth on the snow-covered valley floor below. Thomas Crane looked away from his fire to greet the frozen Alaskan peaks, which, after days of travel, now only seemed an afternoon away. He leaned back in his camp chair, and over the steam rising from his fresh cup of coffee, admired the little clearing he'd found right before the previous sunset. It wasn't the most impressive area he'd seen since his trek to the mountain started, but something about the quaint nature of it spoke to him. The thin pines towered over him from behind, semi-enclosing his campsite before opening to the beautiful mountains that, until now, had seemed impossible to reach. A chill breeze flowed through the opening and around Thomas, rustling the dark hair of his beard and nipping at the exposed portions of his skin on his neck and hands, warmed only by the heat of the coffee he gingerly sipped as he enjoyed the quiet morning he set out to the middle of nowhere to find. The birch trees had a certain quality to him this time of year. The white and brown of the bark contrast against the impossibly finite expanse of snow, and evergreens always stunned him with their beauty, and in his tenure only found these wonders in the center of the last frontier. He was glad that his vacation lined up to send him here early in the winter. If he couldn't have come until January, he would have had to enlist the help of a dog sled to get even a mile outside of any civilized areas. The depth of the snow meant he had to dig for hours to set up camp, wasting most of the few hours of daylight you would get in the Alaskan winter, making travel slow and tedious. Once, when Thomas was sent to western Alaska to work, he'd spent more time trying to build shelters to survive the cold than he did on actual movement to the job sites. But now, in early November, the snow was only a few inches deep in most areas, with the wind drifts piling up a few 3-foot berms against steep slopes, making light foot travel a possibility, while preserving the awe-inspiring white canvas of wilderness that Thomas dreamt of when he lay his head anywhere else in the world. When he'd finished his coffee, he put out the flames of his fire and began packing his camp back into his rucksack. As he worked, he smiled as he thought back to a conversation he'd had with his handler just a week prior. His handler, George, let out a hearty laugh that filled the small, dingy coffee shop they'd found in the small city in Chile that they spent the last month occupying. There was a stark contrast between the two men. Thomas, who wasn't slender by any means, paled in comparison to the mountain that sat across from him, his form barely able to be contained by the booth it occupied. "We've been on the trail for almost 18 months, Thomas." George paused to sip his coffee from a cup that looked comically small in his large hands. And you're telling me you want to take your leave hunting deer in Alaska? I don't see what's funny about that, Thomas replied with a smile, knowing well why George found it unbelievable. No hunter I've ever met wants to go camping, Thomas. They go find a beach somewhere, take a break, get their mind off things. Not go hunting deer in the most dangerous place on the planet. Third most dangerous, Thomas corrected his lifelong friend. You serious? George asked, a glimmer of worry in his eyes. Well, we haven't been to Alaska in years, George. No one's putting in for jobs up there. Thomas took a pause before adding, and I miss it. People are always asking for help in Alaska, but no one wants to pay for an old hunter to track down a Wendigo and giant wolves. Well, I've already planned the route. Delta Junction hasn't had any reports in decades. It's safe. And if it's not... George, Thomas laughed. I just got done dealing with a horde of vampires in the Chilean jungles, and you're asking me if a hunting trip to kill deer is safe? George was right on all counts. The Yukon had garnered a reputation as being one of the most dangerous locations on the planet. More people had given their lives to the supernatural there than any other location on the North American continent. While Thomas wasn't old by any means, in their line of work, a 33-year-old hunter was considered ancient. Most hunters are either dead or retired by the age of 26, their self-preservation winning out over their slowing reflexes, and their fortune amassed, giving them an easy life. The job was never meant to be for a family man, but in Thomas's time he found that many freshly married men flocked to the organization, deeming that 8 or so years of work was well worth the rest of their lives they'd spend on the American dream of white picket fences and 2 children families. But Thomas, well, he had no such dreams. To him, the life of a hunter was the only life to live. As long as his body had life to give, he would keep living it. The organization recruited Thomas when he turned 18. An American company that spent their time ensuring the legends and horror stories that filled the world's media stayed just that, stories. They sent hunter and handler pairs across the world, quelling the threat of cryptids and demons for the highest bidders. The handler would be sent to the surrounding towns of the target location to gather information on the threat, and the hunter would be in the thick of hell, as George would describe it, to handle the bounty. Being good at your job meant that a team would receive only the highest paying bids, putting them in the same location for weeks, sometimes months at a time. And in Thomas and George's tenure, they received the reputation of being the best in the business. Normally, a handler would have 5 or 6 hunters before they reached their retirement age of 40. George, being only 1 year away from retirement, had only 2. Thomas met him when he lost his first hunter, after they'd been working together for a year, having lost his life to a creature aptly named the Howitzer, adding to its long list of kills. At the time, George had already counted the doe-eyed 18-year-old as dead, having been assigned the same bounty that took his friend. He was ready to forget the kid had ever existed, until, after only 3 days, he reported back to the same diner they'd met in, brandishing a fresh wound on his cheek and a single giant tooth as proof of his prize. George knew that he had something special then, and after 15 years, had not been proven wrong. Thomas knew George worried about him. It wasn't uncommon for a hunter to enlist the help of another team. However, Thomas, against his handler's wishes, refused the practice for the last few years. His feats and accomplishments were only added to by his solo treks into the wilds, but Thomas didn't do it for the fame. While there were many rumors, most being tales of his bravery or beliefs that he had anomalous powers, only Thomas knew the real reasons, and only he would know. Even now, Thomas knew that George would be in his penthouse in Las Vegas, worrying about his hunter, standing tall in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. Population 1. As Thomas hauled his rucksack onto his back, he placed his thoughts about George into the back of his mind. He wasn't here to reminisce about his work. He was here to get away from the hunt. He was here to leave behind the horrors that had stalked the world, and, at least for a bit, be a normal person, doing a normal thing. He picked up his SR-25 from its resting place on a nearby log and let his gaze rest on the mountains, drawing in its beauty before raising his shemagh over his face and stepping out of the clearing. With luck, his next camp would be resting in the shadows of those giants before him. Hours had passed, and the sun began drawing the end of its arc across the clear skies above him. Thomas had made good ground since the morning. He checked his Garmin watch to see that in the last 5 hours he had covered 15 miles. The mountains were now only a few hours away, and by his judge of things, did seem close enough to make camp at the base of them before nightfall. Something seemed off to him, though. Even in the dead of winter, there was always some type of life, always moving through the forest. A snow hare, a fox, a caribou. It didn't matter the size, there was always something. Save for a few birds he'd seen when he left camp that morning, it was almost like this part of the forest was empty. That seemed impossible for Thomas. When he was sent into the Russian taiga to assist as hunter in the tracking an ancient witch, known for her ferocity and complete decimation of ecosystems, there were animal tracks and presence of life to be found everywhere. Here, there were none. No sound of wolves' howls filled the air. Creatures didn't jump from limb to limb in the trees. It was almost as if Thomas had mistakenly stepped into a different, dead reality. Odd enough as the situation Thomas found himself in, he didn't feel like he was in danger. Over his career, he developed a sixth sense, a gut feeling to when danger would occur. He always felt watched when on mission, like at any moment a denizen of the night would spring from some unknown hiding place and drag him down to his grave. But the peace of the forest was impenetrable. The wind still blew, dancing to its own frozen song. The sun shone its victorious bright lights, and, besides the utter absence of the wildlife, nothing felt wrong. Maybe nothing was wrong. As he approached a clearing and stepped through the trees, he knew, though, something was. Before Thomas was the remains of a campsite. 3 colourful tents sat in tatters. A cooler looked as if it had been thrown, with its contents across the field, and, just as the forest he'd come from, no life was present. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Thomas sighed. He checked the chamber of his rifle to ensure he had a round ready, and began his approach to the ruins. He made his approach slow, listening over the crunch of each footstep for any sign of life at the camp, his rifle itching to be raised at the first sign of movement. Thomas scanned from tent to tent, to the edges of the clearing, then up to the tops of the trees, looking for anything that could be waiting to pounce. He'd been ambushed like this before once, in Mongolia. A group of cultists had been possessed by their pagan god and built destroyed camps in the desert to lure in unsuspecting travelers for more sacrifices. When he got close to the camp, the group emerged from the sands with their sabers, thinking they'd made an easy kill. But, well, even then, vultures flew over the skies. It did nothing for his nerves when he made it to the first tent. This one was the most intact out of the 3, with only small holes in abundance throughout the sides of the fabric. Thomas noted the remarkable resemblance to bullet holes, as if someone had taken an automatic rifle and slew whoever was resting inside. He readied his rifle and sidestepped around the tent to the still-closed entrance. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath.
readying himself for what he would find on the other side of the fabric door. Slowly, he undid the zipper. The inside of the tent was unremarkable, devoid of life, and the resident looked like he'd left in a hurry, leaving their sleeping bag half open and a bag of half-eaten chips next to it, their pack still nestled neatly in the corner. He stepped away from the tent and looked at the ground around it. Footprints led into the forest. "Oh, you left in a hurry," Thomas spoke to the air. "What were you up against?" Satisfied that he would find nothing here, Thomas started with the second tent. This one had seen its better days. The top of the dome dent had collapsed, as if taking an impact from a large weight. A portion of the fabric near the end had been ripped open to a shoulder-width hole, revealing the head of a sleeping bag. No footprints or drag marks surrounded this tent. Ripped from the bag and into the sky. Why the different MO from the first tent? Thomas puzzled. He felt he would find his answer, or at least some semblance of knowledge at the third tent. He didn't even need to approach to know that he would not find that. The final tent lay in tatters across the campsite. Orange strips of fabric littered the area around it, leaving only the frame of the tent standing. Snow had been kicked into the tent's remains, covering the bag that had been left by its former resident. Thomas stood in wonder of the situation. He approached the center of the camp where a few large logs surrounded a fire pit. Empty bottles of alcohol lay strewn about. Sitting at one of the logs, he held his hand out over the embers of a once large frame. Still warm, Thomas remarked. This happened recently. He gathered his thoughts. Something about this didn't make sense. 3 tents, all attacked in different ways. It was uncommon for cryptids to work together on hunts. Different species usually preferred to stay on their own, segregating their parts of the animal kingdom. It wasn't to say that they wouldn't accompany each other on hunts when they were desperate, but, well, Thomas knew that the things that lived in the forest of Alaska were capable enough and large enough to handle a 3-person camp by themselves. He would have seen scuffs in the snow, where the creatures would fight over the remains of those they killed, greedily picking over the meager scraps 3 people would provide. The weirdest of all was there was no blood anywhere in the camp. With the ferocity the camp had been attacked, there should have at least been some blood, but Thomas found none. Just like the rest of the forest, this place was dead. The only proof anything had been there were the ruins he now occupied. The only clue Thomas had left to go on was the footprints he'd found at the first tent. If he wanted to know what happened here, he'd have to find out what happened to that person. Before he rose from the log, Thomas spotted a box half buried in the snow next to him. Picking it up, he found it was a frozen but still usable box of ammunition. .308 caliber, the civilian equivalent round his 7.62mm rifle was using, close enough to allow it to fire. Not seeing a rifle at the camp, at least Thomas knew his survivor was armed. However, he wasn't sure how much that would help them, or if they were still a survivor at all. As the sun drew lower still from its perch in the sky, Thomas reached the edge of the clearing. He looked back, over the campsite, and to the mountains which, for so long, was something that called to him at arm's reach, now seeming impossibly far away. With a deep breath, Thomas followed the footprints into the woodline. Thomas tracked the prints for around an hour. They led him through an erratic path through the forest, twisting and turning in no particular direction. At times the prints would stop behind a felled tree or mass of foliage, as if they'd stopped to hide from their pursuer, before taking off again in a different direction than before. Whatever destroyed the camp wasn't happy they let one get away, it seemed. Thomas assumed that they'd followed the survivor through the branches seeing as how there were no tracks but the survivors. This still puzzled Thomas because even then there would have been debris from the impact of the creature littering the ground where they jumped, and hiding behind objects not beneath them would give the creature clear sight to the survivor. That clue ruled out flyers too. No, the assailant had to be ground-based. The only thing that made sense to Thomas at this point was a spectre of sorts, ghosts or demons with little to no tangible effects to the world around them, unless they were extremely powerful. Thomas had dealt with them before, on many occasions in fact, but even they would leave signs of their existence. For the life of him, Thomas could not figure out what this creature was. As the sun dropped lower in the sky, its light no longer produced the warmth it had given the world throughout its time over the forest. Thomas drew his shimar higher across his face, leaving only a slit for his eyes. He was starting to get worried. Tracking the footsteps through the dark would be a challenging task, especially with the possibility of an unknown creature stalking the area. He'd need to find camp soon, but if he did, the chances of the survivor still being alive would decrease from slim to none. So he would press on, deeper into the unknown. Something told him he had to. It was then he felt it. As the light began to fade, giving way to twilight, Thomas felt that twisting knot arise in his stomach. He wasn't alone anymore. His senses came to high alert, eyes scanning his environment, ears straining in an attempt to hear the slightest breath that was not his own. There was no sound, no movement, but Thomas knew he had just become a target. The hunt was on. His pace quickened, lining up with the frantic steps of the tracks he'd been following. He wanted his target to feel like it had the upper hand. In his peripherals, he caught a flicker of movement between the trees 30 meters away. It was fast, quiet. Still, Thomas moved forward. The dead forest never felt so alive. The tracks took a right turn, heading up a shallow embankment. Thomas followed them, and whatever was with him gave chase. They took him to the bottom of a shallow cliff face. As he moved much as he thought the survivor was at this point in their journey, he saw that they were running too. There was a hole in the cliff, a cave, and the footprints headed into them. He heard them, their scurrying feet through the snow, walking and then running, then thud. Thomas turned to the direction of the sound, raising his rifle. About 10 meters from his barrel sat no creature. There were no footsteps, no sounds of his assailant. Instead, nothing more than a sapling stood before him. A single growing tree among its siblings of giants, birch by the looks of it. But why, in the dead of winter, did this child have green leaves sprouting from it? The forest had returned to death. Thomas was alone once again, save this sapling that defied what Mother Nature had instructed it to do. The weirdness of the situation overpowered him, and the twisting feeling in his gut ensured Thomas that he was not safe. But he had found his survivor. When Thomas stepped into the cave, he was greeted by a tunnel that twisted and turned for about 20 meters before he saw a light coming from around a bend. There was a fire here, giving Thomas hope that his next clue to the situation was alive. He took a few more steps before hearing rustling from in front of him. "Help!" Thomas began to speak when he got to the corner, but his greeting was cut short by the report of a rifle and debris falling from the wall beside him. Planting himself firmly against the cave wall, ensuring that he would not be the next thing to be struck by a bullet, he spoke again. "What the hell are you doing?" Thomas yelled into the cave. "Please, just go away." The voice was a surprise to Thomas.
He hadn't counted on his survivor being a woman, especially one with a voice that filled the air, such as hers. Soft and sweet, even when panicked. "Did you come here from the camp?" Thomas replied to her, ignoring her pleas. "I have a gun. I know how to use it." "I'm not here to hurt you," Thomas spoke calmly. "I found your camp a few hours ago. I tracked you here. I'm a friend. I'm here to help." "No," replied. "Yeah, I know you're scared," Thomas continued. "I can help you, but you need to let me." "How do I know that?" the woman joked back. She was afraid of Thomas. It made him think that whatever she'd seen looked close enough to human to be mistaken as one. He could possibly even talk like them. You're alive, aren't you?" "No," response. "Look, I'm gonna come out, but if I do, I need to know you're not gonna shoot me. I handle things like this for a living, and I'm no good to you dead." Thomas spoke slowly to her, trying to calm her as best he could. "Put down the gun," he continued. "Can you do that for me?" "Okay," the woman spoke, almost in a whisper. "Just, please, don't hurt me." Thomas heard the clatter of steel against rock. He stepped from his cover into the light of a dimly lit fire, illuminating the small cavern. The woman sat, pressed against the back wall, rifle by her side, knees drawn to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was younger than Thomas, maybe 28, short brown hair clinging to her face. One of her pant legs was stained a dark crimson color. She'd been injured. Thomas removed his shema from his face before approaching her, revealing that he was, in fact, human. Taking a knee in front of the woman, he stared into her deep blue eyes before speaking. "It's going to be okay. You're safe now." As she broke into tears, Thomas thought back to the mountains. Their majesty once a tangible place, now seemed an impossible dream.
Let us keep the dance of rain our fathers kept, and tread our dreams beneath the jungle sky. It has been said that man produces evil as a bee produces honey, but that no evil can happen to a good man, either in life or after death. He and his are not neglected by the gods. Nevertheless, the line between good and evil is permeable, and almost anyone can be induced to cross it when pressured by situational forces. And thus goes tonight's story, my dear friends, a tale of good and evil, straight from Dr. Creepen's vault, the subreddit I set up so you could share your stories with me and I could read them all for you. So now, on this fine Friday evening, it's time once again for you to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Hey Bogdan, how far is that camping site you've been talking about? My friend Yannick inquired from the back seat of my run-down Vauxhall Astra. It was a truly beautiful early afternoon, driving beside the roadside tree line in the north of Scotland. Me and my two closest friends decided to go on a camping trip, a refuge from all the deadlines we had to meet. The weather was perfect. The sky was impeccably devoid of clouds, and the air was still. Not far, really, Ian. Just a few more miles and we're there. Will your banger get us there, Danny? Vihan laughed, his face planted into his brand new phone. I can't find a lake anywhere near here. You don't? Really? I thought Google Maps had everything nowadays. Did you search for loch instead? Yeah, still nothing. Vihan looked at me with a sliver of frustration. Road trips weren't his strong suit. One of the reasons we decided he should take the passenger seat at the front. I hope it's close. It's really close. I promise you, my friend. I hope we get there before we die, Ian murmured from the back, winding down his window. Fuck, it's cold round here. Well, my friend, we are pretty much at the end of the world. There's nothing past Perth in the north, our Indian classmate surmised. The three of us met 3 years ago at the opening ceremony at Edinburgh University. We were equally lost in our surroundings as well. Few others around us really spoke English as we know it. Vihan told me he's from Mumbai, a rather big and gloriously colourful city in India. Yannick was born and raised down in Blackpool, his Polish parents immigrating to the UK some good 30 years ago during the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. At least he understood the locals a bit and could translate for the two of us. We are a motley crew, aren't we? Ian remarked, looking at the rented camping equipment which kept him company in the back. His long, barely coordinated legs struggled to find a comfortable position. Other times, his well-mended blonde hair would be a magnet for the girls, but now it just looked weird, pressed against the roof of the car. I found it funny how he put a huge jacket on top, but still wore shorts underneath. When we are done with uni, we should go visit your place in Bulgaria. I heard it's warmer there, Vihan joked, knowing full well anywhere else in the world is warmer than God-forsaken Perth. After spending 3 years out here with the reindeers, I think we might want to go to your place, my man. Yannick swung forward, tapping V on the shoulder. Guys, we've arrived. I slowly drove the car off of the smooth tarmac and onto a tiny stretch of dirt road, the final obstacle between us and the promised land. 20 or so minutes later, cheerfully filled with protest and remarks, we arrived at our destination. A small, pristine lake lay there hidden from human civilization, untouched and undefiled. As its waters slowly drifted downhill around the rocks and behind the hill across, we started unpacking our homes for the next few days. I'll give it to you, Bogdan. This place is epic. Ian took in the dense, cold mountain air and exhaled a cloud of steam. The smile finally returned to his face after the stiffening trip. Vihan was still shaking, but he seemed to be regaining his own colour. He was a smaller guy, of darker skin complexion and with rough, messy hair. Nevertheless, he was also in his element in the great outdoors. I'd barely had time to take in the view when he got the tents out. Soon enough, he started issuing orders as to how we were supposed to set up camp. You must be thrilled to finally walk on solid ground, my friend. I turned to him while trying to drive down one of the anchors. It's a simple task, but somehow I was capable of failing it. Here, let me help. He basically yanked the piece of steel out of my hand and, with a single blow of the hammer, drove it in halfway. It's about reading the ground. You're strong. That's my problem. I scratched myself behind the ear. Why, my friend? I'm just helping. Well, if we were having a wrestling competition, you'd definitely win, my friend, I laughed. But why would we have a wrestling competition, Bogdan? What did I ever do to you? V smiled, fully aware I was about to propose something he wouldn't like. Well, it's a matter of survival, really. We have 2 tents and 3 people. One of us stays outside and freezes. You petty bastard, Ian intervened. Don't even think you can make me and Vihan sleep in the same tent again. It seemed he still bore ill memories from our last camping trip. Honestly, he had a point. But I got an air mattress for the car. One of us can sleep there. You sleep there, Bogdan. That Astra stinks like hell. Ian smiled in relief. Hell? That's harsh. The old banger got us this far into the wilderness. Show some respect. Vihan quickly gave out a salute in the direction of the Vauxhall. We all laughed. "Hey, Wotan, why don't you set up the chairs and table? Maybe start something on the grill," Yannick suggested. "I'm hungry like the wolf." "Well, sure thing. Any preferences?" "Anything goes, if you ask me, but hey, ask V. He's the vegetarian in the group." Ian smirked. He wouldn't grace a table with his presence if it didn't feature stuff that was moving and breathing at some point. Well, that sparked a lot of debate with our Indian friend, who was not only vegetarian, but also quite passionate about it. "My friend, I packed myself some stuff in the blue boxes. Just please put them to cook before you put the corpses on." He glanced over at Ian, who was definitely annoyed. After all, that meant he'd have to wait 15 or so more minutes before he himself could dig in. "Now, don't kill each other, guys. Look, it's gonna be okay if you just relax and breathe," I giggled. "Hey, mate, you want to be the first victim? Look, just get on with it already. I told you, I'm starving." Yannick had a short fuse, even more so when he hadn't eaten. I decided I should heed his advice and get going. I got the chairs, the table, and the bag with the cooking supplies, and set up a small dining area in between two pine trees towering beside the lake. Soon enough, I got Vihan's veggies cooking, followed by Ian's Asda meatballs. He bought well over 2 kilos of them, which was a bit perplexing. "Hey man, you sure we'll be able to eat all this today? I was kind of thinking of roasting some corn for myself." "Yeah, sure. It won't go bad. It's ball-cracking cold here." Ian looked my way, his eyes fixed on the little gas grill. "You're right. And I tell you, I'm a freaking master chef. Just look at them." I pointed at the now semi-done meatballs. "We might have to fight the wolves over them. Count me in." "What? Wolves? You're joking, right?" Vihan started scanning the surrounding area. He's an interesting character. I found it hard to tell whether or not he was actually worried or just messing with me. "Oh, they're so big the locals call them demons," I said matter-of-factly. "You come here not knowing?" "Well, we're done with the camp, Bogdan. Do you need any help with the car?" Ian interrupted. "No. The mattress came with a pump. You plug in the lighter. I think I'm going to be okay." "Good thing you're driving an antique. New cars don't have lighters anymore." "Really? I didn't know. Anyway, if you are done, let's dig in." It was early afternoon. The table was set, and we enjoyed what was to be one of our last camping trips together. We all had different plans for after we graduated. Vihan was going to go back home and work in his father's company. Yannick wanted to stay in Edinburgh, or perhaps move to Glasgow, but definitely didn't want to go back to his parents' house. They seemed to be in perpetual argument. As for me, I was planning to go and settle somewhere in the south of England, hopefully one day working my way into the city. As for now, well, I had all I could ask for. Good friends, good food, and this quiet, untouched haven, away from everything and everyone. Even the weather was surprisingly good and mellow. It was still early in March, but instead of bone-rattling blizzards and icy rain, we got to enjoy a very still afternoon, only disturbed by our laughter and the chirping of birds. We opened a bottle of wine, supposedly handmade by Yannick's grandfather in Poland, and let the time slip away from us. It was one of those days where all my problems could blur away into the distance, and I couldn't care less about the world around me. Just me, my friends, and the beauty of nature surrounding me. It was serene, pure, and I soon found myself lulled to sleep. I shook, forcing my eyes wide open, ready to be made fun of by my companions. But to my surprise, they were sleeping too. "Hey guys, wake up. You're gonna freeze like this," I said, my voice raspy and crackling. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest, hearing my pulse in my ears. I gulped heavily, unable to shake this feeling that something had happened. I found it, creepy that we'd all fallen asleep so easily, especially considering the temperature outside. What, man? Ian whined. What do you want? Guys, hey, we all fell asleep at the table. We're going to freeze like this. Vian was still cuddled up against his chair, his short curly hair moving slowly with the wind. There's something weird about this place, guys, I said worriedly, still perplexed by the fact we'd all fallen asleep without even realizing it. Vihan let out a long yawn, barely opening his eyes. Ian shook him by the shoulder, which finally did the trick. It's so nice and warm. I froze. I was trembling so my dizzy mind didn't quite grasp it, but I was actually feeling really warm. I put my right hand against my face, and despite wearing no gloves, it felt unnaturally hot. There's something wrong going on here. We fell asleep without anyone realizing, and now we don't even feel cold? What the... Guess it's okay, Yannick interrupted me, lifting his hand and reaching out for his grandfather's bottle. I don't know. We were just tired. The trip was kind of long, and then we ate. They say clean air and good wine make you feel sleepy. Perhaps you're right. Maybe I got jumpy for no reason. Yeah, man, it's fine, he reassured me, his voice echoing around us. My friends, we were only out for 30 minutes, V pitched in. A little nap after lunch is healthy. Yeah, of course. I nodded my head, now ashamed at my reaction. I was worried my friends would pick on me for what I'd said. Yeah. Look at the sun. It's almost gone. How about we call it a day? I'm still pretty tired. We can wake up early tomorrow and hike. That's a good idea, Ian. Vihan agreed. He seemed the most tired of the group. I stretched my body, which had gotten stiff from the chair, and stood up. Guess I should go inflate the Vauxhall presidential suite, I joked, still feeling really tired. My friends nodded in agreement, and each of us went for their own quarters. The night had just begun, and I couldn't let go of this silent fear, the creeping chills running down my spine, that something bad was about to happen. It was easy for me to prepare my bed for the night, but although I was comfortable, I think I wasted quite a few hours trying to fall asleep. Those questions were spinning in my head, trying desperately to figure out what could have caused us to black out the way we did. We didn't even drink that much, especially me and Vihan. I thought it might really have been the air, so clean and crisp, that we got a sort of oxygen shock. That was stupid, I murmured to myself. I guess you can really faint from too much of it, but it's still so unusual. And then, a truly terrible thought went through my mind. What if someone had drugged us? That would explain the ease with which we all went under. I tapped on the passenger seat, searching for my phone. With the light from it, I looked throughout my things. Wallet, document holder, even went through my sack with clothes and hiking supplies. Everything was there. That fact, instead of giving me relief, made me even more anxious. It wasn't a robbery, and, well, there was nobody around us for miles, so if someone really did drug us, it must have been one of my friends. Maybe it was an ill-mannered prank, but it had gone way too far. Besides, who and how did they even put anything in my food? I started retracing the events that had unfurled before, but my memory was hazy. My senses seemed to have suffered from whatever had happened to me. Guess that's why I felt so warm for no reason, I surmised, giving a quick and worried look to all 4 locks of the Astra. To my relief, they were all down,
indicating relative safety, giving me at least some moments to react if someone did try to attack me in the night. I activated my phone's flashlight again and looked through the car for any item that I could use in case of an emergency. My frantic eyes stopped at the sight of the hammer my companions had used to set up the tents. I grabbed it and clenched it with my fingers. I'm just being paranoid. They're my friends. I don't think they're capable of doing something weird like that. Yannick, is a very straightforward guy. He's the sort to yell at your face, say stuff about your mother, and then apologize just a minute later. He never struck me as the kind to hold a grudge or plan a petty prank like this. And Vian, well, as I said, I often find him hard to read, but at the same time, he's the most harmless guy I know. He was always so passionate about the abuse of farm animals, and, well, whatever people said to spite him, he'd never retaliate. He wouldn't shout at anyone, even if they were outright swearing at him. Did he snap? Ian always made fun of his beliefs. It's been years now, and V had never really done anything about it. Maybe he just couldn't take it anymore. Did he know I was going to sleep in the Vauxhall, parked some good 30 meters away from their tents? Is he going to do something to Yannick? Maybe not physically harm him, maybe just give him the scare of his life. I guess it would help his cause if I was very sleepy too, unable to react to whatever was going to unfold. Still, that means I'm safe. As soon as I uttered those words, I felt deep, disgusting shame. It suddenly seemed so easy to sacrifice my friends for my own well-being. I'd spent years with them, but all it took was a bit of doubt, and I'd turned into an animal, solely driven by self-interest. I threw the hammer to the back and tucked myself tight under the blanket. I'd already wasted hours being scared for no reason. I reckoned I'd need my energy for the long hiking tour we'd planned for tomorrow, and unless I wanted to collapse on the way, I'd really need to get some rest. I felt warmth gently creeping across my skin, embracing me and, soon enough, hushing me silently to sleep. Remember, remember. An old lady's voice, breaking and sour, echoed in the air. I opened my eyes, shaken to my very core by the fact I wasn't in my car anymore. I was lying down on the same inflatable bed, but it was in a different place. The surroundings were similar, but there was a cave. A small, rocky entrance was leading to a pitch-black hole in the ground. My heart jumped into my throat as I remembered the sound of the old lady. Is this a dream? I said to myself. Remember. She stood atop me, her blue icy eyes fixed onto mine. Her hair was white, brushing against the skin of my face, dancing with the freezing wind. Her bony, wrinkled hand held me by the chin, slowly sliding towards my neck. I jumped back, scared out of my mind, shouting. Ah! I awoke in a puddle of sweat, shuffling to find the light of my phone. I was shaking like a leaf, paralyzed by fear and confused by the inexplicable string of events that I'd witnessed in the past few hours. First of all, we fell asleep at the table, and now I had this nightmare that felt so incredibly real. At least I managed to find my phone, and it gave me hope. It was just a few minutes to 5. Dawn was on its way. Oh, I don't think I'll be sleeping anymore after this, I told myself, and started looking for my clothes. Screams pierced the horizon. My two friends, they sounded as if they were arguing over something. Their voices were loud, but I couldn't quite grasp what they were saying. Maybe I was right. Maybe Vihan really did try to pull something up in the night. I guess I heard their screams, and that made me have a nightmare.
I felt slightly relieved at the thought that at least I seemed to be in control of what was happening around me, but that still posed many problems. If my friends were fighting, I had to go and try and help them sort it out. But if V had really gone crazy, what could I do? Regardless, I couldn't just stay in the car and do nothing. I quickly put my red mountaineering jacket on and rushed out. In a few running steps, I reached the small encampment. My breath froze. The sight before me being more terrifying than what I had initially imagined. Man, what the fuck? Do you mean you saw her too? I felt a big ice shard slowly slide down my chest, exacting a piercing grip around my core. My heart skipped a beat, my teeth chattering. I knew full well what they were talking about. Guys, I said with shaking voice. My friends looked up at me. I saw her too. The old lady. And the cave. Their eyes locked with mine. Our gazes heavy with what we were about to say and do. I don't know why, but for some reason we all felt this urge, like there was something drawing us into this forest at the far side of the lake. I couldn't explain it, and I guess neither could they, but we just had to go. Hey friends, why are you walking that way? V inquired, as Ian and I made some heavy steps towards the forest in the distance. Don't you feel it too? I asked, understanding full well how insane I sounded. After all, there was no reason to go there. In fact, there was all the reason in the world to go the other direction, get in the car and drive the hell away from here. I do, but maybe we wait until dawn? What if she's still there right now? Aren't you guys scared? I hate to admit it, man, but yeah, I'm scared like an axe-bound chicken, Yannick whispered, undeniably shaken himself. Sorry, guys, I added. I think I have to go. Unable to perceive what force or reason was driving me to run towards the dense, dark forest in the distance, instead of waiting for the dawn and the comfort its light would bring, I sprinted. Step by step, I got closer and closer to the trees, and soon I jumped through the shrubs and into the unpierceable black of the thick canopy. I saw no stars, no moon. Even the weak light of the impending daybreak was not strong enough to reach me, but I kept going. I don't know how or why, but I just knew. I knew where I was going. Not breaking my stride, I emerged through the trees at another clearing, much smaller than the one we set up camp in, but this one had one distinct feature: a small, pitch-black hole in the ground, eerily embedded in the rock of the hill behind it. I paused, taking a moment to catch my breath, finally out of my trance. My mind was getting clearer. I felt I was coming back to my senses. Soon enough, I heard the calls of my friends. They were close by, searching for me. Yannick was the first to come out of the woods, shortly followed by Vihan. Hey man, what the fuck? Really, what the actual fuck are you doing? Ian exclaimed, unable to shake this same feeling I'd been having. The feeling of something terrible about to happen. Vihan? Well, he didn't say a word. Even without looking at him, I knew where his eyes had wandered to. The cave. Something was calling me from within it. I made a step forwards. No, this is a bad idea. Let's go back. Ian grabbed my shoulder. His hand was freezing cold, and he was shaking like a leaf. I must go. I forced myself out of his weak grip and ran straight towards the abyssal hole that called for me.
My friends rushed behind, desperately trying to catch up with me before whatever force was calling for us took me in. In just a few giant leaps, I'd reached the cave and slid forwards, trying to make the small opening in the ground, the pass to what was surely a new world. My companions jumped after me, trying to hold me back as I was making my descent towards the entrance, but they were not needed. "I remember," they stated, my hands planted on an invisible screen on top of the cave opening. Vihan and Ian were flying behind me, driven by chivalry and the blind desire to save a friend in need. The momentum carried them over, the slippery ground underneath denying them grip. Soon their bodies came on top of mine, and all I needed was to move away, barely correcting their descent with my arms so they could safely drop in. As they screamed, their eyes asking 1,000 questions which their minds could not put words to, I told them. "You were good friends. You have served me well. Now you shall receive a gift." Like a vortex of dark energy, the gateway of the cave sucked them in, muffling their horrified voices and setting them free. It was such a beautiful night. So many stars shone atop the clearing. The fresh breeze carried the smell of pine trees, and I could hear the gentle rocking of the lake behind me. "Master will be pleased," I exclaimed, unable to hold back my excitement. "The harvest will soon be upon us. Oh, how blessed the two of you must be, to give away your mortal lives for him. Damned be my soul, but I envy you as I cannot." This experience, it was all too tiring. How many years has it been? I keep notes as I always forget after each rebirth. The North always beckons me, but somehow when I try to write down the dates and the years, my hand does not obey me. Alas, this body needs to sleep once more. I don't have much time left. I lay down, my weary back pressed against the bark of an old tree. I scribble these notes onto paper, unable to shake both the euphoria of what transpired and the weight of my rapidly aging eyelids. I decide to sleep, for when I wake, I shall see my friends again, reborn, given the gift of my master. I must have been out for hours when I came to this interesting sensation. It felt like a tickle, gentle as if someone was caressing my aching feet. I ran too much yesterday. I expended more than what I had. I opened my eyes and I looked down. There, I see two babies, misshapen, some would say, but I call them blessed. Last night they were given a gift more valuable than anything else in the world. They were bestowed with immortality. I bend over and pick them up. They seem hostile. I understand. I don't hold it against them. They are ignorant. Yes, their new bodies hurt. Their failing organs shall bleed, and their very soul shall throb in pain. But it's all for a good cause. Master is coming. They should be proud. Even if they do not see out of their blind, grey eyes, even if their mouth shall stay forever dry and hungry, there is no higher honor than doing good by the Master. Rejoice, my friends. You have obtained eternal life, I tell them as I walk into the lake across the forest. Their weak bones crack and splinter in my hands, piercing their undeveloped infant lungs. They let out tormented cries of pain and agony and blood, but it is perfect. Everything is as it should. Soon we reach the waterfront, and I take one last look at them. They still try to bite me with their missing teeth,
a sight I find adorable. Oh, they were so different in life, but now all their beliefs are replaced by a truly greater purpose, and all their foolish squabbles, what the other eats, says or does, now all that is for naught. Embrace the silent hunger, I tell them, walking forward still, soon replacing the coldness of the water for that special feeling, the unmistakable softness of human skin and muscle at my feet. How many times have I done this before? Perhaps 100, perhaps 1,000. I let my friends gently slip out of my embrace and watch them sink to the bottom of the lake. As they join the quiet choir of countless children's voices underneath the holy water, I record this message. My aged skin crumbles to dust. Once again I return to ash, so the cycle can begin anew. This life I lived without regrets, and I have yet again served my purpose. In a blink of an eye, you too shall come across this rock, and if Master wills it, you shall have more time, more energy to spare. If so, read my notes. From now, from the past. I wonder how my short existence will compare to yours. Yours truly, yourself. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.